I'm not sure if anyone will find this story interesting. When people read confessions like this, they often think it could happen to someone else but not to them. I used to believe that too, until a certain point in my life. What happened to me is quite common in our current age, where fidelity is no longer seen as virtuous and often elicits a chuckle at best. I got married young, at 19 years old, during my third year of college. My wife was a year younger than me, which is a typical age difference for starting a family. Within the first year of marriage, we had a son, and 8 years later, a daughter came along. After finishing college, I joined the Army, where I received a decent salary that allowed my wife to stay at home and take care of the children. My military career gave me opportunities to travel extensively, both domestically and internationally. During my service, I earned several commendations, suffered a war wound in my back, and retired at the age of 42. Upon leaving the Army, I quickly found a job in my field of expertise at a large metallurgical company. Within 5 years, I advanced to the position of Deputy General Director and became a co-owner of the company. Financially, we were always stable, and that remains true to this day. Now, I am 60 years old, and my wife is 59. At the time of the events I'm about to share, we had been married for 41 years. Throughout all those years, I never had any reason to suspect my wife of infidelity. Not once did the thought cross my mind. Our children grew up and pursued careers in law enforcement. My son is now a colonel and head of a department, while my daughter is a warrant officer. They both have families of their own, and we are blessed with grandchildren. We lived a good life, or at least that's what I believed. During our marriage, I never raised my voice at her, and I never denied her anything. Showering her with gifts brought me joy. I truly loved her, and our intimate life was fulfilling. Despite her advancing age, my wife has not only managed to maintain her natural beauty but has also enhanced it over the years. Remarkably, she has achieved this without relying on the sophisticated techniques commonly employed by cosmetologists. Her allure remains a source of immense pleasure for me, as her husband, to behold. However, as I would eventually discover, her captivating appearance was not solely for my benefit. For the past 15 years, my wife Natasha has been employed at a well-known pharmaceutical company. Within this organization, she has risen to the significant position of head of the marketing department. The nature of her job demands frequent travel, a necessity that has become even more pronounced over the past 5 years. These business trips sometimes extended for 2 or even 3 months at a time. Natasha explained these prolonged absences by emphasizing the need to manage the distribution of medications to pharmacies, particularly in the expansive and often remote cities of Siberia. One city she visited frequently was Krasnoyarsk, a key location for her professional responsibilities. Despite the demands of her job and the frequent travel it entailed, Natasha never failed to maintain regular contact with me. Nearly every day, she would call to express how much she missed both me and our children. These daily communications were a crucial way for us to stay connected, bridging the emotional distance created by her physical absence. During this period, our metallurgical firm secured a substantial contract with partners in Krasnoyarsk for the delivery of welded pipes, which were essential for a major oil pipeline project. As the Deputy General Director, I was responsible for traveling to Krasnoyarsk to finalize the arrangements and ensure everything was in order. This trip turned out to be a pivotal moment in my life, one that I could never have anticipated. After the contract was successfully signed, we proceeded to the office of the chief executive for a customary round of celebratory refreshments and snacks. The CEO's office was tastefully decorated, and his desk was adorned with several photographs. My gaze was drawn to one particular photo, and in an instant, I felt as though the ground had shifted beneath me. The photograph depicted the CEO in a warm embrace with a striking woman with auburn hair. With a sinking feeling in my stomach, I recognized the woman as my wife, Natasha. I was utterly dumbfounded, my mind racing to process the shocking revelation. Summoning every ounce of composure I could muster, I managed to casually inquire about the identities of the people in the photograph. The CEO, beaming with pride, introduced the woman as his cherished partner of 4 years. He then extended an invitation to join him at his rural estate for further celebrations, where he promised I would have the opportunity to meet his common-law spouse. During the journey to his estate, the CEO spoke at length about his partner, lavishing praise on her qualities and virtues. He described her as an exceptional homemaker and a loving partner. He mentioned only one issue, her frequent trips to care for her ailing mother, which took her away for extended periods. Despite this challenge, he remained hopeful that they would soon be able to spend more uninterrupted time together. As I listened to his words, my heart pounded in my chest, and I struggled to maintain my composure. The fear of losing control and potentially causing harm to the unsuspecting CEO loomed large in my mind. Deep down, I knew that he was not to blame for the overwhelming turmoil I felt inside. When we finally arrived at the impeccably maintained estate, the host noticed my flushed face and inquired about my well-being. I stammered an explanation, claiming that I was feeling slightly under the weather. As we made our way to the dining room, the CEO introduced me to his wife with a proud and beaming smile. The moment Natasha laid eyes on me, she froze, the color draining from her face. The shock and fear in her eyes mirrored the turmoil raging within me, marking the beginning of an encounter that would change our lives forever. It was evident she was struggling to breathe. Her complexion, once full of life, had drained to a ghastly pallor. Her breaths came in shallow, ragged gasps, and her eyes widened in a mixture of fear and helplessness. Slowly, she began to slide to the ground, her legs no longer able to support her weight. Fortunately, her friend, quick to react, managed to catch her just in time, preventing a painful fall. As I stood there, watching the scene unfold, a chilling realization hit me with the force of a freight train. If I didn't get away immediately, I might harm them both. Panic surged through me, and without another thought, I pivoted on my heel and dashed out of the mansion. My heart pounded in my chest as I sprinted down the steps, not daring to look back. I didn't utter a single word, my mind consumed by a single, overpowering urge, to escape. A taxi happened to be cruising by the mansion. With a wild wave of my hand, I managed to flag it down. The driver, sensing my urgency, quickly pulled over. Once inside the cab, I directed him to my hotel with a shaky voice. My hands trembled as I gathered my belongings, stuffing them haphazardly into my suitcase. I didn't take a moment to think, my actions driven by sheer instinct. From the hotel, I hurried straight to the airport, my pulse racing as I navigated through the throngs of people. I secured a ticket for the next available flight, my heart still pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. It wasn't until the plane was airborne, cruising at a steady altitude, that I began to regain a semblance of composure. The steady hum of the engines was oddly comforting, a stark contrast to the chaos that had just ensued. A single thought throbbed in my mind, syncing with the frantic beats of my heart: why did she do this to me? The details of my journey home were a blur, lost in a haze of anxiety and confusion. I found myself pacing restlessly around my apartment, unable to sit still or lie down. My mind raced with unanswered questions, each one more torturous than the last. By the time morning arrived, my legs were swollen from the continuous exertion. My heart, which had been racing uncontrollably, had subsided to a dull thrum, occasionally dropping to a disconcerting silence. Then, without warning, an intense, searing pain pierced my chest. My vision blurred, and darkness closed in around me as I lost consciousness. I awoke to find myself in a hospital bed, the sterile scent of antiseptic filling my nostrils. My chauffeur had found me when I failed to meet him at the set time for my office commute. Worried, he had used his key to enter my apartment and discovered me passed out on the floor. Without hesitation, he had dialed for emergency services, undoubtedly saving my life. The doctors informed me that the intense stress I had been under had caused my heart rate to become dangerously irregular, resulting in excruciating chest pain. I spent roughly 3 weeks in the hospital, each day blending into the next. During that period, Natasha attempted to reach me multiple times over the phone, her persistence unwavering. I, however, couldn't bring myself to answer her calls. Eventually, I just switched off my phone altogether, seeking solace in the silence. Once I was finally discharged and back home, I reluctantly turned my phone back on. Almost immediately, it rang, and I saw Natasha's name flashing on the screen. With a heavy sigh, I answered. Natasha's words were jumbled, a chaotic mix of justifications, apologies, and bizarrely, accusations. She tried to explain herself, her voice trembling with desperation. As our call neared its end, she raised her voice passionately, claiming that the kids and I were her world, that her heart belonged only to us. She pleaded for my forgiveness, her voice breaking with emotion. I listened quietly to her entire outburst, my own emotions swirling in a maelstrom of confusion and hurt. Overwhelmed, I silently ended the call. I just couldn't handle it anymore. For 4 years, my wife had been leading a duplicitous life, constantly dodging suspicion and weaving lies, not just to me but to our children as well. Despite proclaiming her undying affection for the oil industry and simultaneously for one of its magnates, she continued to share her life with me. Was I merely a safety net to her throughout this entire period? The children had been attempting to uncover the truth behind what had unfolded, their innocent curiosity driving them. However, I must admit that I was filled with trepidation and humiliation, causing me to withhold the entirety of the tale. Deep down, I knew that the moment would inevitably arrive when I would be compelled to disclose it all. Ultimately, Natasha made her arrival a month later, her lingering hope remaining steadfast as she yearned to somehow sway me. After an excruciating hour of listening to Natasha's pleas for forgiveness, I made the decision to call our son and daughter into the room. When they arrived and stood before us, I turned to Natasha and asked her to tell them everything. She took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice trembling. As Natasha spoke, our children remained silent, their eyes fixed on her, absorbing every word. She began by explaining how she had felt neglected, how my failure to give her the attention she needed made her feel invisible and unloved. She spoke of how she longed to be seen as a desirable woman, and when she didn't find that in our marriage, she sought it elsewhere. She confessed to having an affair, describing it as a love that felt more profound than what we shared. Yet, she stressed how much she still loved us and pleaded desperately for our forgiveness. Our son was the first to react. He looked directly at Natasha, his face a mix of hurt and anger. "Mom, you've done something terrible to us and to Dad. It's Dad's decision, but I can't forgive you." His words hung heavily in the air. Our daughter, on the other hand, said nothing. Her face was pale, and tears streamed down her cheeks. She stood up silently, her movements slow and deliberate, and walked out of the room without a word. Natasha's reaction was immediate. She seemed to shrink, her shoulders drooping as she realized the full impact of her actions. Without another word, she left the apartment, not sparing a single glance in my direction. I watched from the window as she emerged from the building and got into a waiting taxi, her face a mask of sorrow and regret. She was heading back to her lover in Crestnork. 6 months later, I heard that her new husband had died in a car accident. His children, who had never accepted her, quickly expelled her from their home. With nowhere else to go, Natasha returned to our city. She tried to reach out to me numerous times, but I steadfastly refused to see her. Our children also ignored her calls, wanting nothing to do with her. Now, she lives in her parents' apartment and works at a local pharmacy. As for her personal life, I know nothing of it. She is just a distant memory, a ghost of a life we once shared.